Hello. Just wait a few seconds and see if Scarbeck, normally just I start talking, Scarbeck dials in, so. Cool, I'll get started. So MTTP is actually looking not too unhealthy given the week we had last week. 36 hours of blockers last week. Almost all of that was down to the GCP incident. And of course, we had Family and Friends Day. So that never plays nicely on MTTP. So not too bad, all things considered. We're still just right over the current target. So announcements, I won't go through all of these, but I do just want to highlight a few of them. So mainly, welcome, Ruben, to the team. Great to have you. If everyone hasn't, if you haven't all scheduled in coffee chats yet, please go ahead and do that so you can all meet. Henry's out this week. Couple of things I want to highlight on C and D. So reliability have made a few changes to processes. So on C, just an FYI, they are now grouping all of their tasks under reliability. So it won't be the individual work streams for observability and data stores and core infra. So if you're adding work in there, just to be aware of. And then D is one that will be more visible to us, and we'll have to manage a little bit more carefully, I think, is incidents will auto close. So previously what tended to happen was they mitigated, resolved, and then there'd be a period of time where they'd sit with the resolve label, the issue itself would be open, and we'd do like the kind of corrective actions and things on there. So all of that will still go on, but after you add the resolve label, it will now close. So to answer your question, Myra, the difference between resolved and mitigated. So resolved is like, say, for example, we have a revert MR that we're waiting to pick into a deployment. Once you get it, you can mitigate the incident to get your deployment going. You know, like the issue is more or less solved, or if we've taken any kind of short-term action to like recover the problem and things are generally looking fine, that would be mitigated. And then it's resolved at the point where like, absolutely, it's done. This thing is finished. So yeah, just to be aware of that. The bit that we'll need to really just keep a check on is that try and, I mean, you can do it straight after as well, but please make sure we're adding summaries and timelines to our incident. So generally it's a little easier, I find, to do that before I add the resolved label, so we get that bit. This is also a new process. If you have feedback, please go ahead and you can add that in as well. So cool, and then Scarbeck's got some time off as well. So on to discussion items, Alessio.
Okay, so today I was looking at the Prometheus push gateway for tracking deployments, and basically there is an underlying problem, which is that deployments happened in a very long period of time, and because push gateway just kept erasing information. So when we push stuff to the push gateway, we just wipe out the old metrics and replace with a new one. But the way, so every run can actually add just one deployment because it runs at the end of a deployment. So many of the metrics out of this are not able to understand that there was a metric reset. So there are some screenshots in the links and things like that. So basically what happens is that some of them are actually counted for the reset. So Prometheus is smart enough to understand that this is a new value, but many don't. So basically keeps thinking that we still have the same data as before. So my proposal there is to run some kind of helper daemon. I've wrote a simple one in Go. It's kind of 20 line of code. But basically you just inform the thing, I did a deployment, this was the time it took, and it just published information to Prometheus so they can be scraped. And so it's it's running on memory, and it never resets unless we restart it. So that's the thing. So Robert, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was wondering if this is another possible use case for an old issue I had where we might want a kind of hosted release tools endpoint that we can do a bunch of different things with that there.
Yeah, I mean, that's it.
Obviously, that's more
if it's
involved
just
than
about
just
metrics.
deploying a simple Go program that does this one thing, but maybe in the long term.
It really depends on how much we want to move away from running everything in batches in CI. That thing that I wrote in Go, it's simple enough to just put it somewhere and just forget about it. I mean, we have plenty of Kubernetes cluster. I think it would cost a penny to run that in something that we already have, because it's just keeping numbers in memory. And if it restarts, in that case, there would be no problem because you would keep counting. So maybe we have 1 deployment, 2 deployment, 3 deployment, then it just, if it restarts, it go back to 1. So from 4 to 1, it's okay because you can understand that it restarted. But if we do from 1 to 1, which is what happened with push gateway, it can't understand that 1 is a new one.
So this one is completely independent from the coordinated pipeline, right? Having this little helper.
Yeah. Basically, the idea is that the coordinated pipeline at the end can do a API call and just record the amount of time that is tracking. And that one, we just keep it in memory. So we just had the data point so that Prometheus scrape this daemon here instead of the push gateway.
So we will push information directly to Prometheus instead of the intermediate that is the push gateway right now.
You can think this little helper as a specialized push gateway. That's the easiest way to think about it, because it acts as a push gateway because you push information to it and then Prometheus scrape the thing. This is the same thing that push gateway do, because push gateway, you push the push gateway, but Prometheus scrape the push gateway. But push gateway is generic, so you can only replace stuff or add information. But for histograms, it's tricky because if you push information, you just replace the old one. And so basically you have your histograms with ones in the buckets, and then you add a new value, which is still 1, and basically you're replacing the old thing. Just a very quick example. Let's say that instead of this thing, we were counting number of API calls instead of just counting number of deployments. So every run will have a different number of API calls. So it would be easier to understand that even if it was a reset, because the number is moving. But in our case, 1 pipeline, 1 deployment. So it always push 1.
Yeah, this is something that we noticed the other day with Robert, that it was resetting the value. So we did something very hackish to work around that. But I was not aware that it was also happening on the community buckets of the histogram, which is also a problem. Which is a problem.
I saw the counters. So it's clever. The implementation of the counter is really clever because you fetch the information and you increase by the old value. That's perfect. But on Instagrams, this doesn't work.
It's kind of surprising though, because that essentially makes the push gateway useless for anything but a gauge metric, right? Because yeah, it's weird.
This is
or something that change if every run has a different.
Right.
Yeah, because if you look at the description, they just say that if you run a batch job, something like every 15 minutes, they suggest you to change it to a daemon. Or if you have something that is short, then they hope that that the numbers that you count are different so that you can understand the reset. Otherwise, they just say, just run a daemon.
I thought Prometheus was supposed to have some logic so it knows if a counter resets, it still continues the incrementation of that value.
Yes, but it's based on basically this is Andrew was explaining me this thing that histograms is kind of a hack on top of the metric system. So on Prometheus level, they don't really belong to the same thing. So in theory, it could be able to understand that because of the sum counter actually reset, then the overall thing is reset. But in the internals of Prometheus, everyone is a different metric. So each bucket is a metric, the sum, the counter, they are all different metrics. So because we are tracking time, the only thing that change is the total time, because sometimes you take 2 hours, then you take 2 hours point something. So that metrics is resetted is resetted properly. But the other one, you're just changing one. So you just say, I did one deployment. And then 6 hours later, you just replace that value saying, I did one deployment. And say, okay, so you are just pushing the old value. And so it's still the same one. So if you're doing rate or increase, just say 0 because it's the same value. As well as histograms, you just say, I was filling one single deployment on those buckets. And then you just wipe and you provide the same one. That's it.
Could we check in with some of the other teams? I'm wondering, for example, like, I know we use these sorts of things, like all the infra teams use this in some way, right? Like, it sounds like you've already asked Andrew though. Is that right, Alessia? Yeah.
And he told me that they're doing something like that in Timeland, no, in the Marquee customer project. So they have a little program running in Cloud Function. I don't even know. There's something running that in that case is scraping Elasticsearch and keeping information in memory. Because, yeah, the biggest problem is histograms.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. Myra, do you want to like say about like what do you want to do about gathering some like extra stuff, or do you want to just go with this approach, or do you want to like compare with some of the other infra team setups?
Well, I was about to ping Andrew to help us with that, but if Alessio already talked to him, we can probably just do this approach. So I think we can open up another issue about this to change the way we are pushing information. I don't know if that works for you, Alessio, or do you prefer to have all of this in a single issue?
It's fine. We can move it to another one that only focus on the keeping the tracked information, and then yeah, we can split into issues. No problem.
Okay.
Will we lose data on this one? So you said like if it restarts, then I mean we'd know about it because it's restarted. But like, are we creating kind of a risk around this stuff? Like I'm kind of wondering, I guess, how scalability are doing things with their error budgets. Because I guess that's a similar thing in a way that maybe it's they're not using histograms, but it would be interesting to know how we can avoid also, like if we're going to rely on this data for a month or a few months, it'd be good not to lose it.
I don't think we keep this information for this long because Prometheus as a retention policy, I think is around, I don't know if we change it. It can be a week, can be a month, a couple of months. But the point is that, so the process has the information in memory. When you scrape it, the Prometheus instance keep it in his own data storage. And then if you do things like Tenos, when you kind of scrape multiple Prometheus from different places, so every Prometheus has its own storage. So the thing that you lose is your local information in your daemon, which is expected because Prometheus keep the thing stored, and that's it basically. So, but if the value changes properly, so they just monotonically increase and then reset, then Prometheus can understand that that the process restarted and is helper function would just do the right thing and give you the monotonical increase rate. But if you just go from 0 to 1 and then again 1 and then again 1 and then again 1, there's no way to tell if it's the same value as before or if it just was a reset.
So just to wrap up, so what do you need for this one? It will be just like basically implementing this little Go program in some part of our infrastructure and then removing or adjusting the implementation of release tools to use this little daemon.
Yeah, release tools implementation is just one line change, basically.
Okay.
Instead of pushing there, we push in the other place. That's fine. It's more about understanding how do we want to deploy this thing. That's because I was thinking about, we can probably put this in a subfolder in release tools so that we have everything together. I just wrote it in Go because I know how to do this in Go. We can write this in Ruby. Probably it's going to be more expensive to run it than the Go daemon. So I was kind of open to suggestion here. So just kind of this thing work and I think it's easy enough to understand how it works. And also if someone is not really proficient with Go, it should be quite easy to eventually change some behavior there. But if we don't want to go with the Go direction, we can rewrite this in Ruby and as well think about how we want to deploy the thing. So in my mind was kind of, in the end, we're going to build a Docker image and then run it somewhere.
We should dog food auto DevOps and rock out our own, whatever that feature is called.
It could work actually, right? Because it's completely stateless.
So do you someone want to put an issue together? We can look at things. So I think it's a kind of a balance between getting something up and running so we can see this data, so we can make progress on deployment SLO. But at the same time, we also know this is like one iteration of many in terms of like overall metrics. So if we can find a nice balance between getting what we need now without needing to do weeks of work, but also something that maybe we know is going to be okay for a few months. We have to think about how we're going to operate this thing. Like, how will we know it's down, and who is going to put it back online if it goes down, and how do we kind of do all of those pieces as well. Who's going to open up the issue? Like, is that something maybe Alessio you could do?
Yeah, I can do it.
Found, and then we can input in there. Cool. Okay. Thanks very much. Let's work out on the issue how we want to deploy that. Cool. And then B, I think might be a bit of a similar type of conversation. So we've following that incident, we need to modify our deployment pipeline so that we're not running Gitly deployments ahead of Rails. So at the moment it's in Canary, we do Gitly, Prefect, Rails, and then we go into the main fleet and we do all the rest of Gitly, the rest of Prefect, and the rest of Rails. That's a bit of a risk because actually we have Rails changes ahead of the full Gitly fleet. So we need to make a change. Java's made a proposal that we could just literally just pick up the production Gitly and Prefect jobs and put them next to the Canary ones. So we would kick off at the same time Canary Gitly, production Gitly, and then we'd do Canary Prefect, production Prefect, and then we'd do Canary web, Canary Rails, and then we would roll in. So it certainly seems like an easy initial one, like iteration for this. I'm wondering if kind of longer term, we might actually want to split the Gitly deployment off these other ones and sort of like stagger it in, but that might be a little bit more work. So I kind of have two questions. One is on the proposal that Java's come up with, it looks like a really straightforward piece of work. One concern I have is I know Gitly team have lots of alerts around their deployment process. I'm assuming they wouldn't get any kind of notifications that a production deployment has completed until we finish the production deployment, because it'll be all in those same tracking jobs. Is there anything else that would be affected in a similar way? Like, I do think there's a site risk because we'll have done a full Gitly deployment. We may not even promote that thing to production, right? Like, there are instances, I guess, and then there won't be any tracking of that deployment. So it's definitely not a perfect, I mean, a better solution would be to also create Gitly tracking jobs that then sit with the actual deployment. But of course, that's a bit more work.
Yeah, also timing is challenging here because we are going to just extend the time it takes to deploy Canary by 1 hour. I mean, you're moving, right? So it would be faster to deploy production, but still, it adds to it.
Exactly, it does add to it for sure.
But we shorten the production deployments.
Sure, right? But we deploy without promotion. So it's kind of...
I mean, that's actually true. The other thing, of course, is the fact that Canary deploys take place when we're not online, theoretically, right? Which is a much bigger problem. Okay, let's go back. I'll add some more comments on this issue. I think we need to think through what this might, we do need to change this, but I'm wondering if there may not be a quick hack. We might actually need to think about how this properly fits in the pipeline. Okay. Skarbek, let's move on to your point.
Ever since we switched to bridge jobs, we the warm-up used to run in parallel with the Canary deploy when it was done. That has since ceased. I was wondering if we still had an issue to address pushing that backwards. That way the warm-up runs at some point.
Yes, we have, but I don't have a link at hand.
Yeah, we should readdress that. I'm trying to gather up all of the kind of additional sort of random little like release tooly type things that we have. There'll be lots of, I think, things come out as we get deployment SLO up and running. We'll see lots of areas for improvement. Thanks, Robert. All the links. Thanks both. Because one thing we are getting close to is thinking about OKRs for Q3. So we might want to see if we can wrap up a load of these things. But if it's a small change, if someone wants to just go for it, go for it. But otherwise, I think in Q3 we can have a think about what changes we want to get in place to improve all the things, basically. Awesome. Is there anything else anyone wants to discuss?
I guess lastly, just a notification that I created a corrective action related to deployer today due to an incident. So
Thanks,
just be aware that we've got a high priority issue in our queue right now.
Awesome. All right, thanks for that. I will pull that onto the board. So we've got a few of these things circling around. But yeah, okay. I'll dig it out and see what we can do with that. Awesome. I shall stop the recording.